Hello, welcome to this webinar on building software incrementally. Here I want to share some practices that can help you deliver value software. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining. So before we start, a brief intro, a bit about me. My name is Pani Bhushan. I work as a technical consultant at Devon. I'm also a trainer from Scrum.org. I teach professional Scrum developer courses, Scrum Master and Product Owner courses, and I'm also a trainer from Microsoft, and I teach application lifecycle management related courses and DevOps Institute and Dora Assessment Research Partner. So the more you can find about me at www.devon.nl. All right. So just to start with takeaways, if you want to get three things out of this talk, these are the three things that are going to be. To build valuable software, you need to have a really rigorous focus on the requirements and have various levels of feedback loops and high level of automation. So these are going to be the three topics that I'm going to touch upon during this next 30-35 minutes. Okay, let's start with this question. When is value of software delivered? Is it when some requirements are captured or signed off, or once a high level architecture is designed, or once coding is done or testing? Actually, if you think about it, all those stages will only bring perceived value of software. The real value of software is when software is running in the production and customer is able to benefit from it. And that's why it is really important to have a mechanism where you could deliver value faster by doing frequent releases. So that's where the whole value aspect of software comes into picture. Now, in my opinion, to achieve this, there are two key broad areas that an organization need to focus. The first one being business agility. So what does that mean? It means the ability to listen to your customers, predict their requirements, ability to respond and keep them engaged in your whole business model. So in a nutshell, it is more customer centric, responsive way of doing business. And the other part of delivering value software also boils down to the technical agility. So what does that mean? Technical agility, in my opinion, it basically broadly you could put into four categories, which are what kind of practices that your development organization follows, what kind of tools that are in place, what kind of application architecture that teams have, and technical excellency is more on the cultural aspect of how well the teams imbibe the engineering culture. Things like focusing on learning, doing hackathons, and able to really go to the next level on their own intrinsic motivation. So these, in my opinion, are four key quadrants of a development organization to be technically agile. Why is it important? Because both business agility and technical agility have to come together to really deliver value software. Couple of years back, I was working with a customer where it was approximately 600 people strong, and they wanted to build a payroll system because they had outsourced their payroll to a different vendor, and they decided to build on their own. So the CFO was obviously the product owner in that case. So CFO came up with bunch of requirements, such as people should be able to submit expense reports, people should be able to approve them, etc., etc. And we were in our first meeting, and so we asked, like any coach that asks a question to product owner, hey, which one of these requirements are most important for you? And probably, as you might have guessed, the answer was all of them are really important. So that's fair, and of course that's a good start. And then we talked about, okay, so what about usability index, what about the usage ratio and things like that. And one of the person from the stakeholders for help desk, he said, hey, we need a document called Form 16. So this was an Indian company where the employer gives all its employees a document which specifies how much money was paid and what tax was withheld, and that document need to be signed by an appropriate authorized person. In this case, it happened to be the CFO. So this guy from help desk said, you know what, we need currently we have a very elaborate process where people have to wait for a really long time to deliver that. Can we do something about it? So CFO ordered those features top of the backlog, and team spent next 3 sprints. They built only 2 features. Number one, login, which was not integrated with the authentication server, but the employees still need to do the proper login with username, password. And the other feature they built was you select a financial year and you download a payslip, and you select a financial year, you could download your Form 16, digitally signed Form 16. Those are the only features that they built, and they were already being used. So in less than 3 sprints, team was able to build working software, and that features were already being used by teams without the need for waiting for all remaining 98 other features. So that's where the real value comes, when the combination of both business agility and technical agility comes into picture. Why? The reason why I'm mentioning is how requirements are treated in an agile context has a heavy influence on how a development team can build features incrementally. So if you typically look at it, so this is a high level requirement flow in most organizations that I have seen, which starts with a high level vision for a product or a service, which is broken down into themes, which leads to a bunch of epics and features, user stories and tasks. Again, so every organization calls them with different names depending on the tool, depending on the context. But for me, what is more important is, in my opinion, a task is something which takes less than 8 hours to complete, and a user story is something which takes 1/3 of a sprint, and a feature is something which takes less than 2 sprints, epic something that can be fit in 1 quarter, and a theme is something which takes 2 to 3 quarters. So this gives you a rough idea on the size of these what the kind of features that we are talking about. And the reason why I'm talking about is, explicitly I want to highlight where the development team gets involved. So breaking down of a user story to a task is purely development team's work, and breaking down epic to features or features to user stories, it's again a product owner and development team's work. Of course stakeholders can get involved, and breaking down of themes to epics is something which a product owner or a scrum master could do. Of course development team can also help. And for the remainder of my talk, I want to focus on those activities where development team is heavily involved, because as I mentioned earlier, how requirements flow into development team has a big impact on how fast or in how incrementally they can build software. Now let's take an example. So this was a case where for a major airline, they had a big epic which was to allow all travelers to provide a smooth travel experience via their mobile devices. And they had one feature which was to do with the ability to do mobile check-ins, and the feature basically talked about hey, as a user, as a traveler, when I initiate check-in, I should be able to get my boarding pass in the end. So the rough case study was something like this, where the APIs are all used. I mean, we were about to reuse all the APIs from the website, and the overall flow of the feature was a traveler initiates check-in, provides some travel information, chooses or upgrade seat, and then choose paid extras and pay for upgrades, and finally get boarding pass. So that's the overall flow. And now if a team gets a feature, how would you break it down into smaller pieces? Like maybe this is a detailed feature outline. Now the question is, how would you start, or which aspect are you going to build first? So I give you a couple of minutes to think about and see if you could come up with an idea. Let's say if I as a product owner present to you this feature, and you as a development team says, okay, we need 3 sprints to build it, how are you going to break it down into smaller pieces? So think about it. Maybe type in chat window which feature you might build first. Okay, so I see bunch of possibilities. I've seen people saying that okay, so we start with first initiate check-in, we complete that, and then go to travel information, we approach in a sequential way. However, the right way to slice the initial slices could look something like this. You initiate check-in, and the first story in your first sprint should be generating the boarding pass, because this will help you to identify the thinnest slice or the walking skeleton, what they call, to reach the end of the objective of that feature. In this case it happened to be generating boarding pass, and that would allow the team to ensure that a boarding pass is already generated, and then they can start focusing on other things such as, okay, check-in after search, or check-in multiple passengers, or select seat, etc., etc. And the benefit it gives is every time a new functionality is added to this feature, you try to ensure that boarding pass is still getting generated. Now, what are some of the techniques that as a development team that you could use to ensure that you break a feature into right level so you can build software incrementally? Couple of things to focus, like system slicing. Think about things like, okay, do you really want to make this feature dynamic, or could some things be static to start with, or can the processing, does it need to be real time, or in the initial part could it be done via batch processing? Build versus buy, automated versus manual steps, differing certain roles, which means for this feature right now we only support a single traveler. People with group bookings, yeah, we don't really support that in the initial sprints. So these are some things that you could think about. And if you move towards behavior slicing, you could think about, okay, looking at acceptance criteria, maybe if there are multiple aspects in the acceptance criteria, trying to break it down into different aspects, bypassing certain workflow steps the way we did it in our previous example, and focusing on happy paths, and also maybe if there is a functionality, don't give any options to customize. Like for example, if there is a search functionality, maybe the initial search, when you get onto the page, it displays all the results. Maybe that's how you first implement, and then you slowly start adding multiple filters. Maybe, okay, now you can only search or filter based on name, and then you can apply a date range, and then you can apply end date, multiple things you could keep adding it. And that's really useful when you quickly want to ensure that you already meet the end objective of that feature. and other things like improving other usability things like scalability, reliability. These things are start with simple UI and then move towards the more detailed UI. You know, these are different techniques that you could have in your toolkit and maybe use appropriately when you really want to break down a big feature into smaller items. Now the next part, so as you could see, we talked about the importance of having right level of requirements. So as a development organization, you could deliver features incrementally. The second part that helps you to deliver software incrementally is feedback loops. And here again, so taking same example, so if once you build this generating boarding pass user story, and when you try to add other user stories such as check-in after search or seat selection, etc., this would be really easy for the development team to add with confidence or change code with confidence when there are a right level of feedback loops implemented. What are some feedback loops that team can take advantage of? It starts all the way down with some IDE level configurations, things like linting, static code checks, which ensure that whatever naming convention that your team has agreed or the style conventions that your team has agreed are followed, and that feedback a developer can get immediately in a matter of seconds if the IDE is configured properly. And next thing is a pair programming practice. So this is a practice where two people sit together and try to work on one machine. So there is probably some of you already are aware of it. So typically there are two roles in pair programming, a driver and a navigator, and what this allows is ensure that constant interaction and communication and collective brain power to solve the problem in a right way, challenging each other and finding the right solution for the problem. So here also this gives immense feedback, and this is also done in matter of minutes. The next one is on unit tests. So these, in a simplistic terms, unit tests are tests which test your code. So code to test code, and this is more at a granular level. Probably you must have already seen the test pyramid where there are a lot of unit tests that you need to have compared to integration or your functional automation tests, which are happen to be the other feedback loops in this diagram. And so unit test typically gives you feedback in a matter of seconds to minutes, and your continuous integration every time code is changed by any team member, and once they commit it to your version control system, a build should get triggered and ensure that those new changes doesn't break anything. And feedback from such CI builds, typically you should get it in a matter of minutes, no more than 10 minutes. So that's a guideline to follow. And then integration and functional automation tests, and then continuous delivery, deploying to different test environments or staging environments, and performing some non-functional tests such as security or load, and ensuring that things really work out well. And the next feedback loop could be in a sprint review, where you invite your stakeholders and actually talk about what you have built, whether that's really valuable. And if you think about it, you could actually add one more circle on top of it, which would be your MVP, a minimum viable product. Can you go to really to your end customer? Can you go to market and validate your hypotheses? So that would also give you immense feedback. Now the question that you need to ask your team members is, how many feedback loops are implemented in your team right now? Think about it, and to what level they give you confidence, and to what extent you could depend on that feedback. So these are the questions that you need to ask yourself, and if there are some feedback loops missing, maybe that's something that you might take into account in your improvement plan. Now the last part is in terms of automation, and whenever I coach teams, I typically help them with a picture like this, which is a combination of practices, tools, and their deployment process or feedback mechanism, so to say. So I really like this kind of a visual representation because number one, it is very lightweight, and number two, it could be used as an information radiator, and number three, this also sort of helps teams to act as some sort of a improvement plan or a roadmap. The way I use this is whenever I start coaching a team, I try to create such a diagram for a team or for that value stream. And in this example, so I am mentioning as it one team or one developer, but when you work with a value stream or in a project setting where multiple teams are contributing to working software, then you can always enhance this diagram. So as you can see, there are some practices and techniques that are mentioned at each level. So in this case, for example, as a developer, where do you write code, and is your Eclipse properly configured, for example, with Sonar plugins to give you feedback? Do you write unit tests? To what level do you write? And what about integration tests? And also some process related things or some quality practices, so to say, like do you have a peer review model in place? Do you focus on pair programming, or do you have a habit of or a culture of having multiple check-ins per day? Do you have maturity of having a collective code ownership, which means anybody in a team can work on any part of any part of the code. It's not that okay, if this is a change in so and so module, only this person or these people can only do it and rest cannot. So that sort of puts team into a sort of a corner. And things like your and development practices, feature toggle, so you could keep modifying this list depending on what's best suits for you. And when it comes to repository, so what kind of branching strategy that you want to focus on? Are you going to have some sort of a pull mechanism or a review process that you want to embed? How are you going to encourage the traceability of requirements to deployment? And when it comes to automated builds part, so what kind of tools that you use, and what kind of checks or quality gateways that you have in that build process, and how does your deployment process might look like? Are there any manual verification steps that are involved? What are the different environments that are involved, and what kind of quality checks that you perform in each environment? Like in this example, there is this development environment where some smoke test and functional tests are done, and it is also used by this team for their in-sprint testing. And when it comes to integration, there they perform again smoke, functional, and integration tests there, and a pre-prod or staging, different type of tests are carried out all the way to production. You could also involve or include things like, okay, what are the other approaches that you want to consider? So once you have such a diagram, it really allows you to sort of put a tick, okay, so right now these are the practices that we already have in place, and we want to move our focus on other aspects in our upcoming sprints. So this gives you a very clear idea on where you want to focus next. Yeah. So these are some of the things that you could focus on. So to sum it up, number one, try to focus on getting right requirements. Number two, have proper feedback loops, both automated as well as involving your stakeholders and talking to business. And number three, have high level of automation all the way from writing code till it deploys to production. So what kind of practices that you have in place, what kind of quality checks you have in place, what kind of deployment pipelines that you have in place. So these are the three broad categories that you need to focus on, which in my opinion will help you to deliver software incrementally. This is what I wanted to share with you. I'm curious if you have any questions, so I'll be here for a couple more minutes, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. All right, so we have a question. It's how do you balance between the business priorities or the deadlines versus focus on quality? So that's a very good question. So that's always a fine balance. However, whose responsibility is quality? End of the day, it is development team's responsibility, and as a development team you act as professionals. Like for example, if I go to a doctor and says, hey, you know what, I don't like my left hand, can you do something, can you remove, can you operate, I don't feel like doing something. Yeah, then doctor will say, that's not a right thing to do because of whatever reasons, because he is a professional and he knows what best for me. In the same way, as a development team with a professional capacity, you also need to act on, you need to take a stand on quality. And so as to put it in a very layman terms, there is always a balance between chopping trees and sharpening your axe. You need to, of course, focus on chopping more trees, but at the same time need to take time to sharpen your axe. Yeah, hope that helps you.
It's funny, we have a question. Which one is more important, business urgency or quality?
Yeah, so this is actually in line with the previous question that was asked. So just to elaborate, so business priority and quality, the value of software is of course in the functionality, but it is also with the quality. If you deliver some lousy features, then your customer is not going to be happy. At the same time, if you take too much time to deliver features or functionality, then yeah, customer, you already missed the market window. So one thing is to speed up and enhance and make sure that there is right level of quality that you deliver. Teams need to focus on automation. So there is this 3-strike rule. Anything that you do more than twice should be automated. Say it be testing, deployment, documentation, whatever that is. So only then you will be able to respond to business needs really fast. Okay, hope that helps. All right, thank you again for joining. I wish you good luck, and feel free to let me know in comments if there is any question, and I'll try to answer them. Thank you.